we've known each other since, I figure it's 1986. We met in Boston. You were at Boston University. You were a sophomore and I was a freshman at Emerson College. And we met through my childhood friend, Stephen Longo, who was your freshman roommate, correct?
Yes, that's right.
And we've been friends ever since. And yet, I don't know a lot about your father.
So my father was Andrew Thomas Hatcher. He was born in Princeton, New Jersey. And he was the first Black associate press secretary for a president of the United States, which was for John F. Kennedy, and then later for Lyndon Johnson. You know, this was really a critical time as the civil rights movement was taking place. And for my father to have had such a high position, it was probably one of the highest positions in a White House administration to that date. He was one of the first 6 appointees by the president-elect when he was elected. So he worked on the campaign for president, and a good friend of his, Pierre Salinger, was named press secretary. So my father was born in 1923. He was born in Princeton, New Jersey, and was raised in Princeton, New Jersey. My mother was born in 1927, and she was born and raised in Middletown, New Jersey. So they were both New Jersey residents. My father was an only child. And, you know, in complete honesty, I don't know a lot about my father's childhood. I'm the youngest of 9 children. And when I was born, my father and my mother had separated, or once from what I can remember, which, you know, I remember from probably 3 years old. So I did not have a really great relationship with my father. And as I look back on it, part of that is my responsibility as well as his. But so that's what I really know about his like childhood. You know, he went to school in Princeton, went to Princeton High School, but always had a sense of, you know, I would say he was always interested in journalism and interested in politics. And at one point he wrote an article, an op-ed in one of the Princeton papers, and I don't remember whether it was a Black newspaper or not. Back then, their papers were very segregated back then. But he wrote an article about why Princeton University should accept Black students. So he was always very politically minded and those sorts of things. In the years of John Kennedy's presidency before he was assassinated, 200 days, which I think ended up being like a quarter of the days of that presidency, my father held those White House briefings. So when you see on CNN or CNBC or those, you know, networks press briefings, my father was the person who did that. And I'm sure there was a strategy to that. There was a strategy to, you know, making it known that this was a White House that was going to look at things differently than previous White Houses, aware of the times that were happening. But my father kind of got stuck in the middle in the sense of there was the White House press corps, and then there eventually were more Black reporters, not always necessarily part of the White House press corps, but Black journalists who felt that the White House put him in there to sort of give them stories and tell them things, and sort of being propaganda to some extent. So my father had to really spend a lot of time gaining the respect of the press corps, of the White House press corps. And, he was eventually able to do that, and also did that with the support of Pierre Salinger, who, when folks from the press corps went to him and they were like, "Hey, we don't trust Andy Hatcher. What is going on?" And Pierre, to his credit, would say, "Andy's in charge of this. This is Andy's call." And so there was, the support there from the Kennedy administration to dig in and get through that tough period of acceptance in order for him to be successful. So my dad, essentially, as the number 2 person in the office, was in charge of a lot of the research that got done. A lot of the press releases that got written were under his purview. So he was more than just a face. He did the work, and was, probably at work 16, 17 hours a day, 6 or 7 days a week. So at probably great sacrifice to his family life and his family. So he worked in the Kennedy administration until the president was assassinated, and then he stayed on for a short time with the Johnson administration, but would eventually leave. And that's when he started his public relations career. One of the things, when my father passed away in 1990, I remember us going to a service for him and being in the car with my brother, and my brother Avery saying, "Hey, Pop," and that's what we called him, "you may not know this, David, but Pop was very proud of you and very proud of the things that you had started to accomplish." And, at the time, I think I started my second job, and I was working at WHDH in Boston. So I was working at a Boston station, and I was an assignment editor. And that, that meant a lot to me, because I never heard that from my father. And I think one of the, interesting experiences I had as a college student before I graduated was I spent summers at the Food and Drug Administration working. And I remember writing my dad a letter, and, I typed it out. We had typewriters back then. And I remember signing it, like David Hatcher, aide, to so-and-so at the Food and Drug Administration. And I spelled aide, AID. And I remember getting a return letter back from my father with the original letter I had sent him. And it had marked in red the misspelling, the grammar errors, all of those things. And I remember being so hurt by that and sort of rejected. But in researching and really figuring out his path, there was a story where I think it was the first time he was put in charge of running a press briefing. And it was talking about nuclear weapons, and folks would be like, how can a Black person, which they called Negro then, how can a Negro, be an expert on economics and talk about nuclear war and talk about these things? And he'd made an error in the release that had been printed out. And that was a big deal. He was under such immense pressure. And so now I can look at that. And I think hearing my brother Avery say that he was proud of me sort of took away some of that pain. And then realizing and reading about, as a Black person, as a Black child, you're always raised as being told you have to be twice as good, you have to work twice as hard. in order to even get to where the beginning of your white counterpart would be. And now I can look back on that and see that that's what he meant. He was being hard on me because he didn't want me to make those errors. He didn't want me to send out a real release or a real letter to someone and use that. And I'm old enough to appreciate that now. I wasn't then, but it's something that made me feel. Now I look back on it and I can see that he really did care.